All right, everybody, thanks for joining us today. We have here Kevin Hall with us. Thank you for hopping on. We were off to a little bit of a rough start with some technical difficulties, but here we are. And if we lose him, it's because his power went out because of windstorms in New York. So wish us luck. Before we get into it, and I understand your book is a little bit about yourself, but the first question I'd like to ask everybody is, tell me a little bit about yourself. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself without telling me everything that's in the book?
All right. Well, I'm 65, retired after a 40-year stint in the private sector, working for a few different Fortune 500 companies. And I retired a little early because the company that I was with decided to downsize and take out 98% of my department I was working in. So luckily, we were prepared and decided that, we got grandkids, 6 of them, so it's time we spend a little bit more time with the grandkids and the kids and just enjoy our life. So that's what I did. I retired officially. But then after I got done doing the honey-do list, and of course a little extra sleeping never hurt, I decided I needed to do something. But I really didn't know what it was I wanted to do. But whenever we visited the grandkids, they would say, "Grandpa, tell us some stories from when you were a kid. What did you do?" And we'd take them back to visit my mom back in the Mohawk Valley of New York, and she would also tell them stories of, "Do you know your grandpa did this and this and this?" And one night I was going to bed, and this title just jumped into my head. And it was called My Christmas in Rosemont. So I decided to sit down and start writing a little story for the kids, and this was just a little short story. And I completed it, and as you can see, there's large print in there. My grandkids now range from 15 down to 4, but at that time a little younger, and they need a little bit bigger print. So I had that printed at a local in-town print shop, and at that Christmas, I gave it to them wrapped up, and I had a big build-up to it and all that kind of stuff, kind of the last gift of the day. And just the look on their face, the expression when they looked at this, and Grandpa, what, whoa! And I said, well, this is maybe the start of some nice stories for you. I got to thinking afterwards, we kind of live in a bit of a throwaway society. And to that end, when my parents passed and my in-laws passed, I said, well, geez, what did they leave behind? Yeah, they got a gravestone we can go to and visit and talk. But their stories that they left behind, they're, in my mind and my wife's mind, my kids might remember some of the stories. The grandkids aren't going to remember much of them at all. So I said, I think I've got to put some of this down in writing. And I think I had another little voice nagging me in the back of my mind. It was my great-great-grandfather, Isaac Hall. If you don't mind, here I'll grab his book. He wrote one, a post-Civil War book, History of the 97th Regiment, New York Volunteers. And, you can see the thickness of this book, 400 and some odd pages, driest history book you ever wanted to read. If you're doing research on the Civil War and Gettysburg, Appomattox, things like that, he was in a lot of those battles. It's in the book. And he also dedicated a monument at Gettysburg, the 97th Regiment monument there. Well, I got to thinking, I wouldn't even know those stories if he hadn't written them down in a book. And that would have been lost to history. And then I also did a little bit, because I had some spare time, a little bit in genealogy. So I found out by doing some research, Winston Churchill's a relative of mine. So, whoa, that's pretty cool. And then a little bit more research, Lyman Hall, the signer of the Declaration of Independence. He's a relative of mine. So in doing all of this research, I said, I now know this, but it was never really mentioned as we were growing up. Of course, as we were growing up in my age, we didn't have the computer or anything like that. Anything you did for research, you had to go to the library, you had to look at the records and go through all the newspaper clippings and things like that just to find the information. Well, today a lot of that information is right available at your fingertips. I mean, if you can search the internet, you can find a lot of this stuff. So that got me thinking, I have a lot more stories, and those stories I should put down on paper. So that led to kind of my second act now. I have, besides that short story, I have published 2 books. The latest book being the one we'll talk about here, my Rosemont, Minnesota Memories. And this is during my teenage years. And what had happened, I grew up in a small town called Ilion, New York. And, I mean, we had 8,000 to 10,000 people in the total town, but a ton of history. And we, at one point in time, had John F. Kennedy come down and do a lot of his campaigning in town. It was really a major town from a technology perspective. We had, I'm not sure from a politically correct perspective to mention this, but we have Remington Arms, the gun manufacturer. That was the mainstay right in Ilion, New York. But there were so many other businesses that came out and a lot of technology. For its time, it really was the Silicon Valley of the East, and as such, we had a lot of dignitaries come to town. But it was a quaint little town, and then one day our parents set us down for the dinner and said, we have some news for you. Now at this time I'm 13, and they tell me, your dad's job has been transferred to Minnesota. Here I'm getting ready to go into the big 9th grade, start my senior high school career, if you will, and I'm uprooted, went out to Minnesota, brand new school, brand new town, new house, new friends, all that I had to do over again. And it was some pretty trying times. And one of the stories I tell in the book is my first week at Rosemont High School. I'm in the back hallway going up to the 3rd floor to my next class, and I hear a lot of commotion on the stairs. And I look up just in time to see 2 kids arguing, and one of the kids takes his motorcycle helmet and raps the other kid on the head with it. That kid stumbles back, some blood coming off the top of his head, and I mean, this is my first week in this school. What am I in for here? But later it went on to become, let me tell you, the most fabulous time of my life. And I met my wife when I was a senior. She was a junior. We've been married right now 46 years and still going strong, and 2 kids and 6 grandkids. So that's kind of the history that leads me then up to this book. And this book is what takes place upon the move to Minnesota and the graduation from that school, and then the marriage afterwards. And that's kind of where I end this book at, is at that marriage. But I do a lot more, Matt, than just talk about the memoirs and my stories in this book. One of the things that people ask, or they first start off mentioning, is, your book is kind of unique. And I said, well, what do you mean? They say, well, it's not just memoirs, but it's also local history. And the way I've structured the book was, the first part of the book, it's kind of all my stories in here, going to school and getting a job, buying a car, going on dates, all that kind of stuff. And then in the back of the book, I start to talk about a lot of the history, and I'm just trying to find the first page of that, a lot of the history of the town and the area. In fact, there's also some fun facts in here about the grocery store that I worked at out there, and things like that. But I also include a lot of photos in the book. One of the photos, I'm not sure if I can show you, see the airplane right here?
Yep.
That was on top of the motel we first stayed at when we went to Minnesota, and it was kind of an iconic hotel. And if you mention it to anybody, oh yeah, we know right where that hotel is, got the airplane on it, we know the owners, all this kind of stuff. Well, we stayed there for about 6 weeks before we found the house that we were going to move into. And when I went to write this book, I said, I've got to get a picture of that. And I said, I know we have one of these pictures somewheres. So we went looking through and combing through all of our pictures, couldn't find it. Called the historical societies, and there's a number of them in Dakota County. That's the main county that encompasses the areas of Rosemont, Apple Valley, Lakeville, Burnsville, and these are all kind of suburbs of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So I was calling them all, and they said, oh, we would love to have that picture, but we don't. They could not find one. They've got a picture when the hotel was demolished, but not when it was existing. So I hunted around and finally found this, but then also shared it with the historical societies out there, and they just absolutely loved getting a copy of it. So I tend to go a little further than just the memoir. I mean, I might think I have a little bit of an interesting story. The grandkids might think I have a little interesting story. But I wanted to give more to the readers than just, okay, let me read about Kevin and what he did when he was a teenager. Let's look a little bit at the history, because a lot of this area has changed. There was a major road that went down by our house in Rosemont called County Road 42. Got my first speeding ticket on that road. But anyways, when I went back for a visit, I'm not kidding, they had lifted the road up, moved it over almost a mile, and now that was all housing development where the road once existed. So there's a lot of that history I cover in the book about that time frame that is kind of lost now. But the folks I have shared this with have absolutely love the history aspect of it. I know I'm rambling a lot, but feel free to jump in, man.
You got a lot to say. I think I've said 3 words in the last 10 minutes, but hey, that's fine. It makes my job easy. I don't mind. Keep talking all you want. I did have a couple of things to say about some comments you made earlier, because the vibe I'm getting for this is that it's like a memoir. And
yes.
I read this this quote, to paraphrase, a while ago, and it was like, everybody, I mean, unless you're like Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, however you say it, or like, you know, Napoleon or Alexander the Great or something like that, unless you have a huge name like that, the average person will get forgotten within 2 generations. And I was thinking about that. I was like, I mean, I met my great-grandparents, and some people are fortunate enough to meet their great-great-great-grandparents or something like that. But how well do you even know them, even if you did meet them a couple of times? And so we come to this very interesting point of leaving a legacy behind for your progeny to understand you in some regards. And my great-grandmother actually had memoirs, which my mother took down, and I've had the privilege of reading some of them, not all of them. And so it is really cool to get that insight into her life and what she was experiencing, and I hope to be able to pass that on to my kids and grandkids someday. And I think I'm a little bit more fortunate in some regards than perhaps our ancestors were, because my kids and grandkids down the line will be able to watch YouTube videos and see me, or they'll be able to go onto my Facebook and see me growing up. I've literally had a Facebook for over a decade now. I know it's kind of old school for some of my other listeners, or my Instagram, or whatever it is, but I hope to leave behind this digital legacy where they can get to know me a little bit, and that'll be a good feeling. And then also, I don't know how technologically possible this is, but perhaps AI could compile all of the scraps that I've left online and come up with a digital fingerprint of who I am, and maybe my kids and grandkids and great-grandkids will be able to talk to an AI version of me, and all my corniness and crassness and all that stuff embodied and impersoned in this artificial me. And so I feel like you've taken this step in writing a memoir that a lot of people probably wish they could do, but never gotten around to. So I really applaud you on that.
Thank you very much, Matt. It really, to me, it's been a labor of love. We have so much fun with the grandkids, and every time they come over, they always want to hear another story. And I just love that aspect of spending the time with them. And as they've gotten older, the oldest now is 15, he wants to know a little bit more in-depth stories. Well, what were you feeling then, Grandpa? How did you know that that's what you should do? And stuff like that. Whereas the younger ones just want to hear the story. But I wish more folks would really do this, even just, jotting a few things down on paper. My great-grandfather, I never knew who he was. Now I knew my grandfather. And my grandfather's name was Art. My dad's name was Art. My great-grandfather's name was Art. But my great-grandfather was killed in a trolley car accident. And he wasn't driving. He was a pedestrian at the time. And so no stories. I never heard anything from my grandpa. My dad never spoke about it. So I wish I would have had some more to understand what he was doing for his life. I mean, his father was Isaac Hall, the one I showed you the book from. But, I can get an idea of Isaac Hall by reading some of the stories in his book. But I have no clue of what my great-grandfather was like. My grandfather, I got to spend some time with him, and my dad. The unfortunate side with my dad is my dad passed away when my wife and I were on our honeymoon. Totally unexpected. What we come to find out later on, it's a heart condition, and I too have that. So I see a cardiologist regularly, that kind of thing. So we make sure that it's taken care of. But, I just wish we would know some more of these details. What were they like growing up? My mom lived to be 92. And so we heard a lot of stories. Now, she never liked to talk a lot about growing up on the farm. And I still have some her brothers that are alive, and I contact with them. Tell me a few more stories about the days on the farm. So I got an idea of my mom. But then when I go, if I don't write some of those stories down, that's it. They're going to be lost. So I really think it's important to do that. And I've been asked by folks, how do you write? How do you even begin? And I'm a big proponent of the outline. And so I'll start with an idea, and I'll, just jot a few bullets down, few more, and pretty soon I have a little bit of an outline. I'm not married to the order. I can change it. The good thing about a memoir is, you can do it in chronological order, so it's pretty straightforward from that perspective. But I tell them that, once you get the outline, then just start to sit down with a piece of paper, PC, even a tape recorder, and just start to talk. And then as you're starting to do it and you're typing along or you're recording along, pretty soon you've got a lot of information there. Then commit it down to something digital that you can format more into a book. And don't worry about the formatting. Don't worry about things of, how do I get it published? How do I market it? All this other, that will come later. But right now, just concentrate on the story, the details. And as you think about more, go back and put more bullets down or add more detail in on a chapter. You're not married to your words. You can go back and change them. But when you think you have it pretty good, then you're ready to move on to the next step. But don't think about that next step until you've written it down. So that's kind of been my advice to them.
You bring up an interesting point, which is the whole publishing aspect of it. So I'm curious. Yes. It seems like your memoirs have been very valuable to your family for sure. But do you think that people outside of your family could see any value in them, even if it's just entertainment value? Do you think you're trying to teach any lessons through them? Give me the rundown. What's the value for someone who you've never met before to buy your book?
Okay. Right now, there's been several hundred of them sold. And to let you know, they are in libraries. They're in one museum in Cooperstown, New York, which, if you know the Baseball Hall of Fame, that's where it's located. There's the Farmers Museum there. So it's located there. There's several historical societies that have it. And I did a book signing back in the Mohawk Valley, and there was another person there with me. He happened to be a high school teacher of mine, Joseph Kalia. And Joe had written a book about Ilion, 300 Years of Selective History. So Joe and I did a book signing at the Ilion Library. Let me tell you, it was mobbed. And we were running over on time, and the librarians are saying, oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. And, you know, we sold some books there. In fact, Joe and I sold out of the boxes we brought down. So I began to see that it does indeed have appeal beyond just the family. And the hard part about all this, Matt, is now the writing's one thing, the marketing's a whole nother task that you really got to understand and accomplish. And you do have to be aware, and I mention this to people, there are scams out there that you have to be aware of in the the publishing environment. Oh, give us a couple $1,000 and we'll get it published. We'll guarantee you so many sales, and they typically fall flat.
Mm-hmm.
So
were you traditionally published or self-published?
Self-published right now. I self-published through Amazon, but I also have them on Barnes and Noble. They've been on Thrift Books. I went on to Walmart and was looking for some books, and sure enough, my book popped up there. So it is circulating around out there. But yeah, it's all self-published right now. The issue with trying to find a publisher, I've got two strikes out of the gate. One, it's nonfiction. And two, it's a memoir. A memoir of somebody who isn't famous by any stretch of the imagination. So those are kind of two strikes against any kind of publisher wanting to take some interest in reading the book, looking at it. And I have reached out to some. I have also reached out to, they say the adage is celebrity sells. And I've reached out to a few celebrities. I'm on their different news feeds and different Facebook groups and things like that. So I've reached out and I keep bugging them. So far, nothing. I'm hoping one of these days some of them will say, well, maybe we'll give you a shot. But the marketing side is hard. If you sell enough
copies, you'll be a celebrity, and then you could sell more copies.
I hope so. I'm working on my third book now, Matt, and I've got so many more in the back of my mind that I want to do. There's even a children's book that I would love to put out there. But so, all in due.
Tell me a little bit more about some of the other books you plan on writing. Do you have any fiction planned, and if so, what genres, or is it all kind of historical and from your own experience?
Right now, the fiction book would be the children's book. I don't know if this other one's going to be fiction or not. It's kind of an interactive book. And for that one, I'll have to set up a website, and the folks who get it, there'll be certain things they need to, without giving too much away, understand, and part of that may be coming back to the website to check on different accuracies, etc. But the next book, I don't mind telling you about the next book. It's really an interesting one in that both my wife and I, as well as several of our friends, have had very interesting occurrences in their life. Now, without getting into too much of a person's religious background or religious beliefs, this is, in my opinion, stories of folks who have passed on to the afterlife but come back and visit for certain things. And I'll go back to this picture right here. My wife and I were looking all over for this. We had all the pictures. This was during COVID. We had all the pictures in our house laid out on the dining room table. Now, we got like a 12-foot dining room table to fit all the kids around. And so we paid pictures all over, pictures on the chairs, etc. And we weren't finding this. I know we had it. My wife remembers seeing it. We could not find it. So we looked over all those pictures, I would probably say a dozen, maybe 24 times. We're in there constantly looking. We know we have this. We know we got it. And pretty soon my wife will tell you, she heard me. I would say, Butch, Mom, Dad, now all three of them have passed on. If you find the picture, help me here. Put it someplace that I can see it, or lead me to where it's going to be. There's a long history of why I do that, because this is not the first time this kind of occurrence has happened. So remember, we've looked around that dining room table several times. So I walk in there one day, and I'm walking around. I say, I know, come on, something's got to be here. And I'm walking around the table, and I see this frame that's been there the whole time. And the frame is one of those multi-picture frames that you've probably seen. It's got, little pictures and some circular pictures and things like that are in there. And I look at it, and I say, geez, there's a piece of glass up on top. Was Sharon doing something in here? That's my wife. And I pick it up, and wait a minute, what's that? And there's a stack of pictures, maybe 8 to 10, in the corner of the frame. I said, wait a minute. I pick up the stack, I start thumbing through. There was the picture. It was in that stack. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. I've been through this several times. My wife has been through this several times. Unless we're both blind, now I do wear glasses, but not for up close. And unless we're totally blind, we never saw this? How did that get there? So later on in the book, there's other pictures of this plaza, if I can quickly find it here, in Apple Valley, that there was some questions out on one of the Facebook groups I belong to, where people were trying to understand I got it right here, trying to understand what the name of this plaza was. And so everybody's having guesses. Nobody's got a picture of it. So I mentioned my brother passed away. I was very close to my brother. It's taken me a long time to get over his sudden death. He died just before he was 59. And I haven't gone through a lot of his belongings. So I'm thinking to myself, well, Butch, that was his name. Even though it was Art, we all called him Butch. I know I haven't been looking through your stuff. I'm sorry, I'm going to go through it today. So I hope you don't mind. So I open up the box that had some of his stuff, the tote actually. There were some picture binders in there. And I'm starting to go through. Whoa, I flipped to a page. There were 3 different pictures of that plaza taken in 1980 that shows also the name of the plaza itself. So I said, whoa, this is the second time now writing this book. Second time that I feel somebody is helping me here. So the next book is going to have a lot of these kinds of stories in it. I've got a number of friends who, once I started telling them, besides the hair standing up on the back of their neck, they said, I got to tell you. And then they start telling me their stories. And it just further cements me in my faith to know, yeah, when we leave this mortal soil, we're not gone. We're still here. And we can still watch over, and we can still help influence. So that will be the subject of the next book, and a lot of real good stories in there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I'm also fascinated with the ethereal and the supernatural and stuff like that. I think, at the very least, even if someone who did not believe in all of that stuff, I think it would be fascinating for them to hear stories from people like yourself who truly believe it, because I don't look at you and think, oh, this person's lying to me about this. It's something that you truly believe in. So at the very least, the psychological aspect of it is very fascinating as well. So from all different kinds of angles.
And my tell you, I'm not a huge religious person. I'm not a big one for organized religion. I am from the belief in the Bible and the belief in the God above. But beyond that, I mean, I'll talk to you about UFOs. I'll talk to you about ghost hunters. I'll talk to you about different treasure hunts that are going on. I just kind of love all that stuff. And
we're on again. We can have a conversation about all that other stuff too. That'd be fun.
I'd love to, Matt. I'd love to. No, this is fun. One of the other stories I talk about in there is we had a trailer as a kid, a travel trailer besides the house, and it was a small, less than 20 foot. But during a major storm in Minnesota, actually a tornado, it blew it on its side and totally destroyed it. So then my parents get a brand new one, a 23-footer. I mention this only because when my friends come over, now I'm 16, 17, 18 years old during this time, we'd go hang out in the trailer, we'd have pizzas, we'd play poker, we'd sit around and tell ghost stories or UFO stories and all this other kind of stuff and just have a whole lot of fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you got to wrap it up here now. Any final comments before you take off?
Oh, well, I do, besides wish everybody a happy holiday coming up. I hope that they've taken away a little nugget from this, and maybe they'll sit down and start to jot a few stories down and preserve a lot of that. It's firsthand knowledge, firsthand history, and to me, that's the best.
That's a very good point. I really appreciate that. Well, thank you, Kevin, and have a good evening.
Matt, thank you, and you have yourself have a good evening.